Y'all are good to go whenever.
Good evening, everyone. I am India Oakes, Chair of the Annapolis Education Commission, and I'm calling our December 2021 meeting to order. Okay, let's start by doing roll call so we can confirm we have a quorum of commission members. Ward 1 is vacant, so on to Ward 2. Jeff McChris.
Present.
Ward 3, Enid Colosimi.
Present.
Ward 4, Kayla Golder. Ward 5 is myself, India Oakes, and Ward 6 is still pending a new commissioner, so on to Laura Booth in Ward 7.
Present.
Ward 8, Jessica Packler.
Hi, present.
At-large member, Odessa Ellis.
Present.
At-large member, Ken Starks. At-large member, Janet Norman.
Here.
At-large member, Grace Matthews. Alderperson, Sheila Finlayson.
Present.
And non-voting member, Pam Bukowski.
Present.
Moving to approval of the agenda, I would like to put appointment of our secretary position after approval of the minutes. Are there any other amendments to the agenda? Is there any objection to approving the agenda as amended? Agenda is approved. On to the November minutes. Is there any objection to approving the minutes? Great, minutes are approved. As referenced in earlier correspondence, Pam Bukowski volunteered to take on the secretary position, and given the city code makes no reference to who can be secretary on our commission, there is no regulation stopping a non-voting member from being active on the commission in that capacity. So all that said, is there a motion to appoint Pam Bukowski into the secretary position until our next election of officers in May?
I make a motion to appoint Pam Bukowski as our recording secretary. Is that what it's called, or secretary position?
I second.
Any objection? Great, motion passes. Pam, the position is now yours, and we all greatly appreciate all you will be doing.
Thank you.
I am not aware of any submitted public testimony, so I will turn the floor over to Dr. Joanna Tobin for any updates or issues to discuss from the Board of Education.
Thank you, Chair Oakes, and thank you for inviting me as always. It's a pleasure to be here. I haven't been here in a while, so it's nice to see everyone. So I'll just say a couple of things, and then if there are questions, please feel free to bring them up. One thing that just came out today is that we are having, the board is having a workshop this coming Monday, December 13th at 6 p.m. on the blueprint for Maryland legislation and the specifics around implementation, obviously, particularly as it pertains to AACPS. As most of you know, workshops are an opportunity for the board to get information. They are open to the public. We don't take testimony, but it will be broadcast, and I highly recommend as many of you as can listen in or find the recording afterwards when you have a moment, because obviously this is a huge issue in front of all districts and great opportunities, but the specifics of it for a lot of people are fuzzy and complex. And so that's coming up on Monday. And of course, next Wednesday, we have our regularly scheduled board meeting at which the superintendent will be presenting the budget for 23. And, as I'm sure you're familiar, our schedule is that the first presentation is made to the board in this December meeting. The board then has until February to vote on that budget. In the meanwhile, obviously we're doing our own work. We will have a budget workshop. Let me make sure I've got the dates right here. So there will be a board budget workshop on January 18th at 6 p.m. Prior to that, however, there will be 2 board budget town halls, one on Tuesday, January 4th, which will be held at Old Mill High School, and one on Thursday, January 6th, which will be held at the boardroom on Riva Road, both at 6 p.m. These are in person. This is sort of the old style where you come and sign in to testify when you get there. More information, obviously, will be forthcoming on that between now and when we get closer to those. But I want you to be aware of it because this is a very important time to advocate for what you see as the priorities for the Annapolis cluster. As everyone knows, you have to advocate to the board to get things into the budget. And we vote on those things. And then, unfortunately, you have to keep advocating to the county executive who will hold his town halls. There will be one specifically for District 6. Obviously, we don't know when that will be, but it will be announced. And then once his budget is submitted to the county council, you have yet another opportunity to advocate in front of the county council to keep the things in that you would like to see. So, we're getting into budget season, and I just want everyone to be aware of that. I think that's a very critical time for advocacy, and the more voices we hear, the better. The other thing I wanted to mention, I know you have an issue around charter schools on your schedule, on your agenda for tonight. Last month, we did, if you didn't catch it then, the board's workshop last month was on charter schools. And it's very valuable to go in and watch that if you didn't have a chance to see it. The recording obviously is on the website in the usual places, because there's a lot of good information. The reason we had it is we will be deciding this year on another possible charter school application in the county. But there's a lot of good information there about the process. Maryland has its own very specific laws, which are frankly very different from most other states with regard to charter schools. So I think it's worthwhile for anyone who's interested in pursuing that to watch that that workshop, which was, I believe, about an hour and a half. And finally, let me just say, we're having these workshops once a month because that was one of the recommendations that came from the Gibson audit, which was done a couple of years ago and touched on a lot of issues around board operations, increased efficiency of meetings, and so forth. So what is very valuable is to separate information gathering from doing the business of the school system and the business session and voting. And this gives us around sort of certain very weighty and complex issues another opportunity to sort of dig into that information and ask questions without unduly elongating some of the board meetings that every once in a while happens. So, so that's what's coming up most immediately. Obviously, there's a lot going on, so any and all questions I'm happy to take. I saw Ms. Ellis, I think, had her hand up.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
Oh, there's discussion about charter schools, huh? I have a question about that. I have to watch the seminar. You say it's online or where? Where is it located?
It's on the AACPS website. The recorded board meetings, other events are on our YouTube channel. And if you go into the board website, into the board page, you should be able to find the link to past meetings and past workshops, etc. So,
okay. So thank you. So if you're considering charter schools, are you going to be looking at all options of charter schools, or will it still be under Monarch?
No, it's and you'll see this if you watch the structure is that a group, an organization, whatever it may be, gets together and makes a proposal to the local authorizer, which in Maryland law is the Board of Education. And so this next, I believe the next application we're seeing happens to come from the Lighthouse Foundation, which already has Chesapeake Science Point. But the point is, as someone presents an application, there's a process for review. And that is the application that's been presented this year.
Okay, I understand. All right,
yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I didn't have a chance to watch it yet. Where is the proposed location for the new charter school?
You know what, Ms. Packler, I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm blanking on that. So I have my notes somewhere, but that's far back. So apologies. I can check it out. I can get back to you.
Janet.
Thank you. Dr. Tobin, can you tell us some of the process of how people are going to be allotted testimony time for the public budget workshop and the public budget testimony? Like sometimes it favored those who could get there at 5 p.m. and on a work day and sign up in person in order to do that. Sometimes, it favored those who were at their computer at the moment of release for a testimony document. How do we know in advance that we can get it? And has the board made it important to AACPS that, some people who are still not able to come inside concentrated buildings of many strangers don't need to do virtual testimony? But if you can tell us how they're scheduling testimony.
The official, I don't believe the announcement has been made, and I haven't heard the final word on it myself. And so we'll continue those conversations, but you bring up some very important points that I think we need to consider as we move forward. The last I heard is this will be in person, but obviously that's up for discussion. So we will continue to have that conversation.
It's always at such an awful time right after New Year's. Like people's minds are not on, it's time to give testimony.
Yeah. I know.
Cool stuff. And it catches people off guard and they're not ready. So we have to be able to prepare them, in mid-December and say, this is how it's going to work. This is the process. Put this on your calendar now. Prepare your testimony now.
Right.
So that we can get people to speak up, because we can't get that at the drop of a hat.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the reasons I'm bringing it up here, because I have found too often that people wake up on January 2nd and realize that there's a hearing on January 4th. So, but your points are well taken, and I will bring them up in our discussions.
Yes, if we can please get the info ASAP
Yeah.
of how testimony is going to be doled out. Thank
Yep.
you.
Will do.
Alderperson Finlayson.
Thank you. Joanna, going back to the subject of charter schools,
Mhm.
am I to understand that there is an application in the pipeline and therefore now we're learning the process?
Well, so what we did is, yes, there's an application that's been presented. There's an entire process which is
Mhm.
laid out. You know, when the hearing, there's a slide deck at the beginning that lays all the timing out because
Mhm.
staff has to review, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why we as a board had a workshop on it, because this board hasn't made one of those decisions for the last few years. So most of us who are on the board have not been through this process before. So we were being updated on where it stands. So yes, there's a timeline, assuming all the reviews, you know,
Mhm.
go as they, you know, go through fine, at which we then review it as a board and make our determination. So yes, there's one in the pipeline, and we're moving forward. And as I said, I brought this up, first of all, because I think everybody needs to know that. I can say to Ms. Packler, it's not in the Annapolis cluster. I just can't remember where it is exactly. But I think I know, obviously Ms. Ellis has expressed her interest in this for many years, and that it is something you're going to want to pay attention to as it goes through, but also then just to know more about the process should anyone here wish to undertake putting a proposal together or something like that.
Well, that's where my question was going. Does this mean that anyone who has or is considering an application for a charter school, does that mean that they can now submit? Is there a block of time when you're accepting these, or is it ongoing open process?
I believe it's an ongoing process. Obviously, you know, you open at certain times, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to be set to, so that, you know, you can't submit in May to open in September or anything like that. But it's a process that's available. Usually those submissions come initially in the fall, are considered through the winter, and, you know, you make a decision early enough that then you're ready to, and often it's from the time the determination is made, it may be a couple of years before the school opens, because obviously sites have to be secured, various other things have to happen. So it's it is a long process for anyone who goes through this. And as I said, this particular application is coming from an organization that's already running one charter school in the county. So they're kind of aware of this process. And I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, as I said, we've had a lot of things going on at the board, and this, as you know, Chesapeake Science Point is a high school. This is an elementary, which has a focus on STEM and robotics. You know, similarly, Chesapeake Science Point has a STEM focus. So that's their focus. And, you know, one of the considerations, obviously, for a charter school is the extent to which it fills a need that is demonstrable and is not being filled elsewhere. A contract school is a different thing, right? The Monarch Annapolis is a contract school. That's a school that the county determined it would contract with a group essentially because of overcrowding. But a a charter is a different thing. And it has to show that there's a logic to why we would bring that charter into the county. It offers our students something they wouldn't have an opportunity to get elsewhere. So that's the essential question, along with management and all the other pieces that have to be evaluated in a proposal like that. So does that get at your question?
Yes, you answered it. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Jeff and then Odessa.
Yes, is there room for more than one charter school application, or are we just looking at just one charter school application right now?
I don't believe there's any limit to, only one at a certain time. As I said, it's a complex process. So when the time from which something is submitted to when it opens could vary, two schools could apply at the same time. One could open in 2 years, one could open in, 3 years or something, depending on. So I don't believe there is a limit on that score. There's a sort of practical limit in that the review is extensive that these proposals have to go through. So there's a lot of staff time that goes into a review. So it would be tricky to suddenly have a lot of them at once, and that might back up the process a little bit. But no, there's no necessary limit that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you.
Jeff.
Yeah, thanks. AACPS has a very detailed book online. It's at aacps.org/page with a capital P/1081. And that book covers flowcharts. There's a time, there's a list of all the requirements that go into the process. As Joanna said, it's a very, very invasive, intrusive, and detailed process. This is not a one-page application. This is a book-length application that's going to require a ton of work if there is a group of people who wants to go in that direction.
Yeah, it's extraordinarily complicated to do this, and requires real dedication and, frankly, expertise to do it. So, it needs a carefully thought out structure, and who the group is and what the structure for it is and the support. But I will say, I noted that Maryland has rather different laws around charter schools than many other states, in that it ties charters so closely to the public school district. For example, in DC, there is a separate public charter school board of education. The A County Board of Education serves for all of our charter schools. And it does mean that our charter students, our public charter school students, are really AACPS students. And we share a lot with our charter schools. And I think there are certain advantages to that, but it also means the bar is very high for applying to have a charter in the county. So.
Pam.
Dr. Tobin, when the applications come in from the various parties of interest, do they indicate where in the county they would like to place their school?
I believe they do. They have to, as Mr. McCree said, they have to explain everything in depth, because that is part of the question too, with regard to where charter schools are placed, and again, not the needs they fulfill, and, you know, does it make sense to have them in a certain area? The other thing is charter schools, as you probably know, often are in unusual spaces. They might take over, you know, something in a shopping area or something like this in a strip mall. So they tend to sort of reconfigure spaces that aren't necessarily purpose-built for schools. I think Monarch Global purpose-built their facility, if I recall correctly, but, you know, not everybody does. And so that's part of the process too, is sort of figuring out where space is available, where real estate is available that is affordable, but that can also then meet the standards, because obviously in reconfiguring a space, they have to meet all the standards that any school building would meet in the county. So, you know, there are all these parts of the puzzle that have to be put together in the applications.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Jeff, could you please put that page in the, could you list that for us, please?
Yeah, I was searching for the chat here. I'm not sure we've got a chat right now, but the page is aacps.org/page, PAGE with a capital P /1081.
Thanks.
Yep.
Dr. Tobin, just to circle back to Janet's comments on public testimony, I wanted to note the best case could be made to have virtual testimony at the January 6th meeting, since it's at the boardroom.
Yeah, I am going to ask about that myself. We have a lot of complicated, as I'm sure you're aware, we have a lot of complicated arguments around what the OMA, according to our attorney, will and will not allow. Now, obviously, we have had virtual testimony all the way through, and we continue to have it at our board meetings. So personally, I'm going to look into that because I see the value of it, and I see a lot of people who wouldn't otherwise be giving testimony. It's obviously very hard to do at Old Mill because I'm not sure that Old Mill will be broadcast either, because again, we don't have the TV set up there. But it is something that I'm hoping we can facilitate in our boardroom. Thank you.
Corey,
Hi, I have a question. Monarch has a high turnover rate, as far as the staff goes. So,
Mhm.
like, what's going to be the difference between, Monarch and this new charter school?
Well, that I can't, at this juncture, I can't tell you much about it because we haven't seen the actual proposal yet. And, you know, charter schools are subject to issues that, to some extent, all schools deal with. And so it really depends on the particular staffing and the particular administration in any given building. So that's something that's part of the management structure and what's going on with the school, but I'm not sure there's anything built into the specifics of the school that dictates whether or not that will be an issue.
Thank you.
Ms. Tobin, I wasn't sure. Did you tell her that Monarch, the school that she's speaking of, is a contract school? Does she understand that?
Yeah, Monarch is a contract school as opposed to a charter school, so that is slightly different.
Does that change now that Monarch's, sorry, Janet, I saw you had your hand. I was just wondering if that changes now that Monarch is open to the entire county. I mean, it was a contract school because it was only open to the Annapolis cluster, but now it's open to the whole county.
Yeah, I don't know. My last understanding is it's still considered a contract school. So I don't quite know how that works, but that's one of those questions I'm going to be following up on as we look at these proposals and kind of where we are with that.
Because,
Can you describe how it's different for those not aware?
The contract versus the charter. So again, it has to do with why the school comes into the district, right? And contract schools are schools that we as a district decide to bring in to an area. One of the reasons can be overcrowding. One of them can be that we just think in that particular area, we want to introduce something that this other school, this particular kind of school would have. A charter school is one where a group comes in and applies to get a charter to be a public charter school in the district. So one is prompted by a CPS, one is prompted by somebody coming in and requesting that they be granted a charter by the Board of Education to operate in the county. So that's the essential difference.
but most people think that Monarch Annapolis is a charter school. And whenever you're talking to them, they assume that I'm talking about a charter school. And then
it's complicated. It's not something, I think many people sometimes are still fuzzy on what a charter school is. And so it's, these are terms that we use now, but it's just not something that, unless you're following this stuff fairly closely, makes a lot of sense to many people. But that is the difference. So
may I add something? I was TAC president when the first charter schools came into existence in Anne Arundel County.
Mhm.
And I negotiated the contract for the teachers. The teachers in the charter schools work under a different contract. They work not for the superintendent or the school system, but they work for their board, who has full autonomy to hire and set parameters for the teachers, as well as for the educational platform that they are using. They are independent financially, which is why a lot of charter schools end up being unsuccessful, because they have to be autonomous from the school system. In a contract school, they don't have that autonomy financially. The school system pays for the contract school. The charter school organization is totally responsible for almost every aspect, from meals to transportation to the physical structure and plant of their buildings.
Yes, that's correct. And it sets a very high bar to run a successful charter school, as you point out. And, it's why, we don't have an avalanche of applications. It's not easy to meet those standards and then maintain the sufficiency. And, again, charter schools are paid essentially by pupil, right? They receive the amount per pupil that we do, but they have the autonomy to determine in different ways where that money will go, how that will be divvied up. Though it's my understanding, and Alderwoman, correct me if I'm wrong, that in Maryland, the teachers at charter schools are still union teachers. Am I correct about that?
That is correct.
Which is unusual compared to many other states. So while they have autonomy in what they pay their teachers, there are constraints that sort of keep what they do in line much more with the other public schools. But they still can make determinations about, if they want to throw way more money into special ed, or why they want to throw way more money in, they get to do that, where contract schools don't have that kind of autonomy.
And so, Ms. Tubin, why do so many people say that charter schools are taking money away from public schools?
Well, that's a long conversation, and it has a lot to do with various perceptions, some more accurate than others, I think. But I think the concern is in some quarters that when you have a lot of charter schools, people end up focusing on that. And because charter schools tend to be smaller, tend to have certain, a certain focus, there is often concern that they can sometimes be in the position of sort of having a less diverse student body, in the sense of maybe not being able to meet the needs of many special ed students, for example, or other students who have other possibly other needs that smaller charter school can't meet. And so there's a concern in some cases that sort of skims off the public schools, if you will, the other public schools, leaving a kind of disproportion in services and a number of other things. I think we don't have a lot of charter schools in our districts in Maryland, partially because of the structure of charter schools in this state. And so I think we've seen less of that. But if you go into areas that are very heavily charter school areas, there have been some issues around that. And it also really has to do with state regulations. As many of you know, I evaluate for accrediting charter schools in various parts of the country. In some places, in some states, there are very stringent requirements about where charter schools can be and cannot be. And generally, they have to be in areas of very high need. There are other states that make no requirements, and you will see charter schools plopping themselves down in the wealthiest neighborhoods, and sort of only catering to more affluent students. And then there are complaints that, they show these great results, but they're actually not addressing the needs of the whole community. They're kind of focused on a small group, but that has everything to do with what particular states determine, because it is the states that determine how charter schools, and there are states that don't allow charter schools. I believe South Dakota, I think it is, has no charter schools. It's either South Dakota or North Dakota. I'm forgetting which. Whereas in New Orleans, there's a district that is, is it in New Orleans or is it more in Louisiana? I think it's New Orleans, has a district that's entirely charter schools at this point. So, it varies tremendously.
Janet.
Yes, I have a request for the board regarding the budget workshop, the budget testimony, public participation. Having been someone who's participated for many years and observed the process for many years, separate from the issue of virtual testimony, whether or not that will be allowed, can you please ensure that budget testimony is live streamed and recorded from the Reba Road office boardroom, because it has seemed like it was purposely not recorded for many years because it provided critiques of AACPS, that they didn't necessarily want to have people see all these critiques and what the teachers were saying, what parents were saying, what people were asking for. And I thought it crushed transparency, the system. And the answer was always, oh, well, oh, we just didn't record that, or that's not a recorded one that you can watch. And so I'm asking in terms of transparency, can you please, talk to your fellow board members and ensure that that is televised and recorded?
Duly noted. It's my assumption, certainly for the Riva Road one will be, but I will certainly.
I wouldn't assume anything. That has been the best approach to CPS procedures. Don't assume, just ask.
Yes. Thank you. I will do.
Thank you. I appreciate your advocacy there.
Jess.
Yeah, I had a question, just, sorry, and I don't want to belabor this any longer, but I did have a question when you were talking about like contracts versus charters and programs. We have been asking for a very long time for the school system to consider putting a science program in a Georgetown East, a STEM program, or something along those lines. And with a contract school, does it have to be, does it always, with contract or charter, does it always have to be initiated outside of the school system? Like, does it require somebody to take on that, or can the school system say, this is what we think is best for this cluster or this school? And if it's that, if what we're talking about, whether it's the STEM program or whether, it's the other discussions that we've had over the years in the Education Commission, what is there a way that Anne Arundel County says, yes, this is a good idea, we're going to do that? Or is it always someone else's burden to take this on?
A contract school could be done under the auspices of the county. And in fact, that's generally how the contract system works. The charter school is a group coming from the outside in and proposing something. And my own view, just speaking for myself, I've been concerned that we have the STEM magnet programs outside our district. And so any student in District 6 who wants to go to one of those magnet programs that are already extant has to have transportation to the consolidated bus stop. And that concerns me. The other thing that I just personally feel we would benefit from tremendously in our district is a bilingual immersion program, in preferably at the starting at the elementary level, because that's when we know that children best learn a second language. But we also know that English language learners learn better. The research shows in an immersion in a bilingual setting. And we also know that English language learners are more likely to retain their first language, which very often now is lost, if they're in a bilingual program. So those are two examples of things that, yes, I think our district could benefit from. And on my radar, personally, obviously I can't speak for my colleagues, are things that down the line I do want to pursue, because I think they would be tremendously valuable for our system. And frankly, the bilingual would, it's very hard to find bilingual teachers. And we could grow our own if we started a program like that. So those are a couple of examples of things that I think I would like to pursue, and I think we can pursue internally, and explore ways either through our own ACPS schools or potentially through a contract school that would offer that to our students here in the Annapolis cluster.
How many charter schools do we have in this county, and the names?
I'm thinking we have, is it 3? Ms. Finlay, Alderwoman Finlayson might know better than I do. I'm trying to think. There's Chesapeake Science Point. There's Monarch Global is I believe a charter school, not a contract school.
I thought
Maybe
we only had one. I thought the Monarch schools were all contract schools, but maybe not. I don't know.
I believe that one's, I really am fuzzy tonight. I had my booster a couple of days ago and I'm still not. I believe there is a difference. I believe one is a contract and one is a charter, is a charter. And of course we had a KIPP school that closed. So I believe those are the two right now that we have. But
KIPP and Science Point opened at the same time.
At the same time, yep. Yeah. Science Point has done very well. So as I said, Science Point's the same organization that runs Science Point that's proposing an elementary charter program. So
is that the Children's Guild?
No, that's the Lighthouse Foundation. Children's Guild runs the Monarch schools.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, it's complicated too, because you have these management organizations that run the schools, right? And for those who, you know, may have forgotten or not be aware, that was sort of the premise around charter schools when they came up, was that these were publics, and there are out there a few private charter schools, but we're talking about public charter schools. Public charter schools were public schools managed by a private organization, essentially. And so it's the management that is really the critical part of it. And I should say, our charter schools and contract schools in this county and in this state are reviewed exactly like all our public schools. And so we don't have the kind of thing I do in other states. We don't have accrediting bodies coming in and accrediting. That's all done through the same process, essentially. I mean, we have a specific office that oversees it, but it's all done essentially through the same process that our public schools are.
I think that was one of the perceived, and I believe one of the strengths of our state law, is that all students, regardless of whether they were in a public school or a charter school, would be held to the same standards.
Yeah.
That's not the way it is, as you said, in other states. They have their own testing, their own standards, and you know, there's no comparison.
Yeah, it varies. I actually did an independent consulting project a year ago where I evaluated the state laws in all 50 states around charter programs, and the variety is tremendous in the way they're handled. So yeah, Maryland probably has one of the strongest laws or sets of laws around this, I think.
But, you know, I wonder why, you know, like I say, Anne Arundel County only has 2 charter schools, whereas up in maybe PG, I think they have in Washington, D.C., they have a numerous, I don't know how many in PG, but I know it's over probably 4 or 5 charter schools in that area. But, you know, you were thinking about the bilingual immersion, which is a good idea because my grandson is in one of those schools in Texas. But if we don't address the poverty and the children who are in these poverty communities, this smash and grab and crime is going to get worse. I feel that education, we got to do something with the education in this country. And these kids are not being educated. They're coming out of school with no skills. They don't have any, you know, jobs and things like that. You know, I mean, I'm not saying charter schools is the answer, or you know, for everything, but education needs to be reformed. We have to get something different in this country to address the issues that are going on in these neighborhoods.
I urge you to watch follow what's happening with Blueprint for Maryland. Watch our workshop, because that's where Blueprint largely came from. I mean, this
But,
is,
but before Blueprint, it was the other, what was that first one? The other one, what's called?
Thornton Commission.
Thornton.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean,
And some lessons were learned from the Thornton Commission. And one of those, I mean, I apologize, Ms. Oakes, shut me up here if you need me to shut up. But the point is that one of the things that is distinctive about Blueprint is there is an accountability and implementation board, which exists to see that this thing is implemented with fidelity. Because what the Thornton Commission realized was all this money was thrown out there, and you have masses of agencies and silos and, you know, different bureaucracies, and there's nobody standing at the center figuring out what's happening and is everything being implemented with fidelity, and how do you stick with it for 10 years, which, you know, this is a 10-year piece of legislation. And so that was one of the pieces. There are many more. We could take up the rest of the evening discussing it, but that's where the impetus for Blueprint came from. And that's the goal. And part of it is that lessons were learned from Thornton. So, but anyway, if you watch the workshop, you can ask, you can see if you have additional questions.
Okay. I mean, I understand.
Thank you, as always, Dr.
I've heard
Tobin.
this over and
We will
over and over
transition
again.
to any remain. Thank you, as always, Dr. Tobin. We will transition to any remaining discussion on charter schools as we move on to committee reports. Jeff, do you want to open?
Yeah, thanks very much, India. You know, the long-term members of the commission know that we've been investigating some of the numbers associated with student performance for a number of years, right? And in particular, just before COVID, we spent several months talking about the discrepancy, the delta, the difference between high school graduation rates and student proficiency rates in both math and science. Now, last week I sent out a copy of the last presentation that we had before COVID shut everything down. It included high school performance data from Annapolis High School, from Bates Middle School, from Annapolis Middle School, and most of our elementary schools, right? And to summarize, let me, I won't share my screen, but I do want to try to summarize what that data said. Out of our high school, we have an overall aggregated graduation rate of about 88%, somewhere around 90%, which is really good, right? It's you know, nobody points to that and says Annapolis High School is failing. But if we look a little bit more closely at the student proficiency data, that proficiency data tells a really different story. And it says for Hispanic, the Hispanic Annapolis High School students, their proficiency rate is down in the teens, right? And the African American population is only slightly better, and that's in the 20% in math and science. And so, you know, the story that these numbers tell is that we're sending our graduates out into the world with a shiny diploma that says that, you know, we're doing okay. But in reality, the functional skills that we define by proficiency levels, we're sending people out the door. 4 out of 5 are not proficient in math and English. And so, you know, that has always troubled me. I've been looking at this data now pretty closely for about 15 years. The numbers wiggle around a little bit, but they really don't fundamentally change despite the emphasis over several superintendents and several different federal education entities The last time at the national level, we really looked at these numbers was, I think it was back in the early 2000s under the No Child Left Behind. The No Child Left Behind statute, I understand, is very controversial, but one of the parts that I found most telling was the requirement that individual schools release disaggregated data, meaning data by ethnic group, that gave proficiency levels, right? And those schools that did not pass all ethnic groups gained a stamp of disapproval called failing adequate yearly progress. And when that legislation was superseded several years later, those those stamps of disapproval went away, and we never really heard too much about that disaggregated data very much after that. And that's been over a decade now. And so, in my opinion, it's fallen by the wayside. And so, when last week I heard that the Bloomberg Foundation up in New York was making available $750 million in seed money to help charter schools get launched, with particular emphasis upon those students in areas where their schools had been failing them. And I took note, and I sent out to the members of the commission a copy of his op-ed piece that announced his initiative, and as well a couple of screenshots of the actual numbers from the Anne Arundel County and Maryland State school numbers that put out in graphic form exactly how the public schools have been failing many of our students in terms of graduating them, but not giving them the proficiency levels that I think we all agree that somebody who gets a graduate certificate ought to be proficient, right? So I throw this open to the members of the commission with the question: is there support here in this body or within the broader community or up at the city council level for pursuing this? Knowing that we're going to have to get a group of dedicated people who are going to be willing to devote time, treasure and time and resources to be able to put together a package to be competitive. So let me pause there and see if anybody has any questions or comments.
Jeff, I have a question. And as you know, I share your concern with the abysmal levels of proficiency that we have recorded based on the statewide testing for math and the statewide testing for language arts. I wonder if we've gone away from those particular, I can't even remember what they were called, Dr. Tobin. Those testing, methods of that particular system. I think, yes, we need to improve math, science, and language arts proficiency. Are those test numbers reflective of what our graduates can actually do in the world? Do you need to pass Algebra 2 to be an HVAC technician that we need? Do you need to have those particular very course specific proficiencies to be deemed proficient in functional skills that you'll need for career success? And so I think it's because I would like some more of our charter school things to be opening up more vocational technology, more access to the career paths that is shown we need, and not just like more college pipeline that we're oversupplied with, or that maybe doesn't fit the needs of our kids in the Annapolis cluster as much.
Jeff, I would say yes, absolutely, from the city's perspective. And I'm sure that if we decide to get a group together, the city council will support the effort. I have started a nonprofit called the Annapolis Career Academy. It's in its budding stages. We just got our 501c3 status, and we have our bylaws and all of that. But we are geared, our nonprofit is geared or is targeting those high school students who graduate with nothing to do. They're not going to college. They couldn't get into a vocational program when they were in school. And so we, as you said, and your numbers have proven this over and over and over, that they graduate and our graduation rate looks excellent, but we have not prepared a large number of students to go out into the world and be successful. And so the Career Academy is targeting those graduating seniors, doing an assessment with them to determine their aptitude, their interest, and then putting them in a training program. And when they finish that program, they will be certified to do that work professionally. More along the lines of skills-based training. And then after they finish the training with their certification, we will assure them of jobs. So what you're talking about and pursuing the Bloomberg Foundation's program, I think is something we definitely should pursue. So I am there. And as I said, I'm sure I can get a resolution of support from the Annapolis City Council.
So Sheila, is this academy, is this for students in high school? Is it a high school program? I mean, how would you structure that?
It really isn't. Well, we would take high school seniors. But initially the target was for those young people who are graduating from high school. They have their diploma, but we would take probably seniors from high school.
But see, I thought Jeff was talking about more so a charter school, a startup for a charter school, and it's so hard for these young men to or students to become seniors. And I would think that we would want to try to start earlier, at least, well, I prefer elementary myself, but at least middle. Because once they get into the 9th grade in the high school, that's where we seem to be losing them. Does your data suggest that, Jeff, that where are we losing the students? In what grades? Jeff, can you tell me that?
Well, I don't have the numbers about when students depart the school system, Odessa. That's probably a question for, Mr. Mosier and the institutional research people at the county school system. Maybe Joanna can help with that. But what the numbers that we circulated this past week show is that same level of proficiency data, the percentage of proficiency in ethnic groups, disaggregated by ethnic groups, remain fairly constant from elementary up through middle school up to graduation, and that doesn't change. So to your point, Odessa, I think you have an argument for some type of intervention at any level, right? At elementary, middle, or high school, if the metric you're trying to fix is that level of proficiency. You see it throughout the K-12 range of age levels.
Well, based on my experience working at Annapolis High School, so many of them just don't, I mean, they may start out in 9th grade. By the time they get to 12th grade, I don't know where they are, but so many have, we've lost too many students by the time they get to the 12th grade. And so I would think that we would try to think of a charter on an earlier intervention, probably, I would like to see it at elementary myself. I mean, Sheila, I think that what speaking about is great. But like I say, based on my experience at the high school, we lose too many by the time they get to 12th grade.
Odessa, we've
Well,
talked about
you
this.
know, we have shared our concerns about how the high school graduation rate is determined, because the number of young people going into the 9th grade is very different from the number graduating as seniors. So we know that there is a big group of students that are lost in somewhere in that 4-year span. Now, when I was in graduate school back in the early 80s, and I did research, extensive research at the University of Wisconsin on educating African-American males. And at that time, say 81, 82, we were losing African-American males in the 5th grade. Today, the research shows us that we're losing them in the 3rd grade.
And that's the
And
reason why
I've said this many times, and the Board of Ed knows this. They have the same data that we read. So you would think that there would be an emphasis on grade 3 and targeting those young people that are being missed. And there isn't.
So I think
Anyway.
that actually the school system is, at least at Eastport right now, they are doing a targeted program for kids. It's the Foundations program, particularly when it comes to literacy. And so they are doing it targeted for 2nd and 3rd grade, specifically for that reason. But part of the problem, I think, just is the sheer, when you get to 5th grade, you can't stay in elementary school for very long, right? You can't be held back in elementary school 2 years, because then you have a 13-year-old in 5th grade, and that's not okay. And we don't tend to lose kids in middle school because it's still a legal requirement to attend school in middle school, right? The reason we lose kids in high school is because we have kids who have stayed back, and then they turn whatever the age is that they don't have to be in school. And then they get out, or they disappear, and it's not as much of an issue, right? When it's a 17-year-old who isn't showing up to high school anymore, as it is a 12-year-old not showing up to middle school. A few years ago, we did talk, a few months ago, we did talk about this whole discussion and the concept of having a middle school charter school for specifically this reason, right? For the 5th graders who aren't ready for 6th grade yet. They haven't, because just as Jeff said, once that gap happens, that gap stays. There's not a catching up. So what they really need is a gap year or 2 years to catch up from that end of elementary school in the middle school, so they're not entering 9th grade 3 years behind, right? So we're giving them that time. And I almost think that having that type of, if we're going to do a contract school or we're going to do some sort of program, we want it there, because then by the time they get into 9th grade, they're going to be more focused on, or more capable of saying, okay, I maybe don't want to go to college, but now I have the capabilities to go to Cat South or Cat North. And then I think increasing the capacity at both of those schools and not making them so much GPA based, I think is really important. But I really think that, the discussion that we had a few months ago about that contract or charter school being for the middle school kids who need that extra helping hand and need to get the foundations and the pure basics, math, the multiplication fixed before they can go into the high school, is going to be a lot more valuable to our community as a whole than something that catches them at the very end of high school.
Just to add to statistics, when I ran numbers last year, most of our elementary schools had proficiency rates under 10% for our African American 5th graders, except West Annapolis and Rolling Knolls, And the only reason West Annapolis did not have low numbers was they didn't have a single African American fifth grader that year. So we need to target our kids long before high school. Dr. Tobin, you had your hand raised.
Thank you. So a couple of things. Again, to sound a little bit like a broken record, this is some of what's behind Blueprint. So the idea of early preparation, universal pre-K, for example, we've figured out that that's a huge area where we find the gap starting, kids literally landing in kindergarten behind. And so that's part of why that's part of that structure. Generally speaking, the most fragile transition in high school is between 9th and 10th grade. That's where we tend to lose students, is after 9th grade. And I've seen charter programs in various places, for example, that really have a kind of 9th grade academy attached to their middle school for that reason, because they feel it's incredibly important to sort of keep those students, give them that bridge before they move into 10th grade. Interesting, because developmentally, 9th graders belong in middle school, not in high school. Just like 6th graders developmentally belong in middle school, I mean, in elementary, not middle school, in terms of their age development. But we've, for various institutional reasons in this country, we have shifted that. But so that's something that many people work on. The other part, to address a couple of other things that came up. Yes, the Foundations program has been introduced. We had a workshop on literacy a few months ago. It's a topic a lot of us on the board are particularly interested in. The Ready to Read Act was passed, and there are various things that we need to be held accountable for in that act with regard to preparing students to read and teaching them to read. The other thing is, back to Blueprint, one of the critical parts of Blueprint is the technical and career and technical education, CTE. And the premise of Blueprint is that students will have their academic requirements out of the way by the end of 10th grade. Those last 2 years of high school then are a place where the student decides kind of what they want to do, right? But if they choose the vocational track, the goal is to have them graduate from high school with a certification, not just having taken a few classes or had an apprenticeship, but with a certification. But they will have fulfilled their academic requirements so that, and this is just the world we live in right now, and our students are looking at in the future. You know, you might get your HVAC certification, decide to do that for a few years, and then decide down the road, you know, I want to go back to college, and start at the community college or wherever. And the whole premise of the structure that Blueprint is supposed to implement is to give students that ongoing flexibility. And the words exactly in the research that Blueprint is based on, which was research largely done by a man named Mark Tucker, is, you know, that graduation is no longer going to be a matter of checking a box. That the premise here is that students come out of school able to lead a life. And that is the key. And if you know anything about Blueprint, you know it's benchmarked against international systems that have done well. And you know, if you've got 4 hours of time and nothing else to do, the Accountability and Implementation Board had its first meeting last week, I think. I have not gotten through all 4 hours yet myself, but it's very instructive. And it addresses, their work addresses a lot of the questions that are being raised here. And I think it's worth considering that this is all part of this conversation, that these, for all the reasons that have been laid out by many of you here, that's where this work came from, is a recognition that we need to change some things, and we need to change them pretty radically. So that's just a few points to touch on based on what's been brought up. Thank you.
Enid.
Yes, Jeff, getting back to your question was how many people would be interested? And in answer to your question, I think that everybody feels, that something needs to be done. I also think that everybody here is willing to put forth an effort to help. However, I think there's a wide variety and a diverse concept of how that would work. So we could go on and discuss all night long. Should we do a subcommittee to actually pinpoint where the need is? And to piggyback off Sheila's, I read the same book. And by the 3rd grade, they knew who was going to graduate and who wasn't. I mean, that's research I know it's been 10 years since I read that. So, Jeff, I know most of your statistics came from high school, but I bet if you went back to middle school, you would find the same thing, that kids are moved on to high school, not functioning, not being proficient in it. So how do we go about, Madam Chairperson, if you could tell us, I think we need to support Jeff, and I think we need to, however, have a smaller committee to see exactly how we're going to propose to go forth.
India, can I jump in here? So I just wanted to follow up on that. I think that's a good idea to break it into subcommittee and keep moving forward on this. Knowing that these things sometimes take a few years to get rolling, what can we do in our cluster to more quickly activate change for the kids who are in these next few years? And what about I think culturally, we need to talk to our families about the idea of delaying your kids' entry into kindergarten and 1st grade until they're ready, and having some sort of, effective redshirting program where we prepare you with pre-K or with pre-1st grade, so that you're not going along too early and not mature enough. I mean, my kids were at the very end of the cutoff year, and as males, were about a year younger than many of their classmates. And that knowing how mature you have to be at the end of high school, making these decisions, trying to go for internships and stuff, they all would have benefited. I know many young men would have benefited from being a year older. And not being rushed into kindergarten when they're 5. So if we can think about, talking to our parent communities and knowing what's available for them to have that delayed entry as we keep preparing the young student to then be successful by 1st grade, by 2nd grade, by 3rd grade.
Janet, I have a question, because that is a really good point. But Joanna, it is my understanding that the pre-K program in Anne Arundel County is we call it pre-K, meaning before kindergarten. But when my son was in the pre-K program, I had actually asked that question, like, what if a kid, is in pre-K and you're concerned that they're not ready socially or emotionally to move on to kindergarten? What do you do? And I was told at the time that the pre-K program is a 4-year-old program, period. So there is no way, if a kid's in the pre-K program and they're not really ready for kindergarten, at the time, at least, that I was interested in it, I was told that no, that repeating pre-K is not an option. Now, I don't know if that's still the case, but if that is the case, then do we have a mechanism, or does Blueprint allow for a sort of broader, rather than pre-K as a sort of, this is what you do when you're 4, pre-K as more of a, this is a preparation to start kindergarten, and maybe kids come in, at 2 and do 2 or 3 years in that program before they're ready to move on to kindergarten.
I mean, I think you're now getting into the real granular details of what implementation is going to look like. And as with all things, there's what it is on paper, and then what happens when it hits the ground and issues start emerging. Generally, in AACPS now, certainly from kindergarten up, if you feel your child either needs to, move ahead or wait, that has to be discussed with the school, and ultimately the teachers make the decision. And if, you can't appeal those decisions if you don't agree with them, but that's generally the structure. One of the issues with implementing this is frankly money, right? Is what kind of facility capacity do you have, right? So when you have people sort of wanting to broaden out that understanding, that's something if that's the case, we're going to have to work out. I'm not aware that it's specifically built into Blueprint at this time to think that way. I mean, I prefer that we think that way. As many of you know, I spent a lot of time around Montessori education. That's exactly what Montessori does. But it flies in the face of what it takes often to manage a big public education bureaucracy. So I guess that's a long way of saying, as that emerges, we're going to have to see how it works out. And to some extent, people are going to have to advocate for that, and with that goes the question of what are the standards. Again, are we checking boxes? Are we just saying, if you're 4, you do this? Or are we saying, wait a minute, where are you as a child? And where's your social and emotional development and all the other things that go with it? And I think that's frankly TBD at this point. So, but it's a good point.
Before we get to more comments, I think a subcommittee is a great idea. The question is who wants to be on it. And just for reference, you do not need to be a member to be on a committee or subcommittee, so anyone can be a part of it.
Are you asking for volunteers for the committee? Just, sorry.
I couldn't hear that very well either.
Yes.
Is she asking for volunteers for the committee? Because I would
Jeff,
like
I
to
have a question. I know you're stepping down from the commission. Is this still something that you plan to be involved in, or?
Yeah, if there is a consensus that this moves forward, I'll still continue to remain engaged even after I step down from the commission. Actually, not step down, my commission expires next month. Right, so I'll continue to stay engaged, but I do think it's going to require leadership from within the commission as well.
Are we asking for names to be on the committee? Is there?
Yes.
Okay, put me up. I mean, you know my hand is up.
I'm interested in being involved in it. I'm not interested in chairing.
Similarly, I'm a possible reviewer and such, but maybe not central workhorse.
I would like to
And
help
I
as
will
well,
email
but
the
I
whole
don't,
commission too.
I would like to help. I don't, yeah, I would like to help as well.
Can we talk to some people on the outside and can they be involved or be on the committee
Yes.
also? Okay.
I'd also like to serve.
This is Annapolis Jack from the mayor's office. I'd like to be involved in this.
Great. Laura, did you have a comment?
No, my hand was stuck up. I'm sorry.
Well, Jeff, I spoke first, and so I hope you already listed me because I am definitely interested.
Okay, thanks. Well, I've got one more month on the commission. How about if I look into what the Bloomberg application is going to look like? That'll take me through about a month, but I do think, India, somebody here on the commission is going to need to raise their hand and say, I've got it from inside if we want to move forward. Not only that, but I do think we're going to need to think deeply about who the members from outside this commission are. And, if I might make a comment on my own perception of where KIP fell short, it was in not having an engaged board that was out ahead of some of these facilities issues. If this is going to move forward, it's going to have an engaged board that is all 18 players. And so I might ask ourselves to look through our Rolodex and let's see if we can find some, particularly in some of the underrepresented communities that we find sometimes difficult to bring to the table for these education discussions. So I'll take it here the next month, but Indy, I do think we're going to need to find somebody to chair this up inside the commission.
Jeff, maybe we should look to some folks in the community who have attempted this in the past, and the different areas of expertise that are going to be needed, such as having someone with the financial background and wherewithal, in addition to the academic piece. So maybe try to define those roles.
I think that's a great idea, Sheila. I think reaching out to some former members of the KIP engagement there would be very helpful. And it's always helpful to have somebody with a financial background.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to talk to some professionals in education and try to see if they would be interested in working on the committee.
I think that's a great idea, Odessa. We're really early in the idea stages, but there are a number of charter management organizations and education management organizations. I think CMO is the acronym. Places like KIP who have had great success in settings that look like Annapolis, bigger cities, more urban settings where poverty rates are very high. And although it's maybe too early to tell right now, but reaching out to them for guidance, I think would be would probably be in order right now. They would be able to set up the framework of what they would need in terms of money, in terms of personnel, in terms of community engagement. So that would be one of the first phone calls I would make. KIP, I think, has at least one facility up in Baltimore right now, in Maryland, and perhaps some down in DC as well.
Thanks, Jeff. And I think once we see who is on the subcommittee, we can determine who takes charge in helming it. Jess, do you want to talk about transportation?
About the buses, and, oh, I've gotten, a lot of complaints. My last complaint was from this parent up in Rolling Knolls, and she said that they haven't had a bus up there the whole school year. It's kind of hard to believe Rolling Knolls doesn't have a bus up there, but anybody know what's going on with the buses? I mean, I think Robinwood is okay. I'm not sure what's going on in the other neighborhoods, but anybody know what's going on with transportation?
So,
Joanne
sorry.
may be able to help us out.
Sorry if I missed the beginning of transportation. I had to deal with my kids real quick. But I'm assuming we're on transportation committee. Yeah, great, perfect. So Odessa, I've been doing a lot of research. And we've had some conversations. I've had some conversations with Joanna. I have asked for some information from the school system, and have reached out to some people within the city, because this is clearly not an issue that's going away anytime soon. It appears that right now, other than the raises that were given and the bonuses that were done with the county executive's office, the plan is pretty much to wait until drivers are hired. And that, in my mind, is not a feasible solution. We have every day, we have buses that have not been running for months. And, we are now in the second quarter of the school system, the second marking period. And there are parents who are taking off work. There are children who are just continuously not getting to school. And, when we talk about all the things we just talked about and about the achievement gap and everything else, chronic absenteeism is the number one or one of the top 3 issues at the majority of the schools in the Annapolis cluster, from elementary through high school. And it's on the school improvement plans. And, they're doing all these things to try to combat chronic absenteeism. But then here we are with buses that aren't even running. And so in my mind, just waiting until the drivers get hired is not going to work, right? We have kids that need to get to school. And the city has done, they've made it free for all kids to ride the bus to school, which is fantastic. But I think that is just the very first step. And so I really like to see us as a commission and work with the city, because it seems that the school system is at a standstill, and this is affecting a large majority of our students. So we are not 33% of the school system, but today the buses that were affected, 33% of the buses that were affected were our buses that affected us. Our kids who go to the STEM program at South River had no way to get home. Our kids that go to Annapolis High School from the Rolling Knolls area, from the outer Annapolis Peninsula area, from Robinwood, had no way to get to school. The city is apparently providing 2 buses that take some kids to school. I've asked a couple times for more information on exactly which buses those are and which communities they're servicing. And I have not gotten that information yet, but I'm working on it. We had invited the director of the transportation department from the city to attend tonight, but he's not here, obviously. But we are going to try to meet with him separately. Every morning we have buses that aren't running. We have circulator buses in the city of Annapolis, and I would like to see if those circulator buses are not taking people. It's the high school that's primarily affected, and then a couple of the elementary schools that are affected. But the circulator is not running full circulators between 6:30 and 7:30, which is when the high school kids need to go to school. So is there some way that the city circulator buses can be used to help alleviate this problem until the bus driver situation is taken care of? Is there something else that the city can do? Is there a way that we can extend the bus line that goes near Annapolis High School, but not very near Annapolis High School, and still involves extensive walking, and change. We're heading into the winter months, which is when bus services usually change their routes anyway. So could we look at an immediate, do an immediate assessment of the routes and make sure that the city bus line is going to Annapolis High School, and that the bus times, and to the other schools, the bus times are at a time that makes sense to getting to school, right? The bus isn't showing up, either an hour before or an hour after school starts, which is what happens in some schools. I know for the longest time, the bus line at Eastport Elementary for kids who wanted to take the public bus when they were going home showed up 15 minutes before school ended, or kids had to wait for 45 minutes after school ended. So what can be done to reassess what time the stop times are? I did some data grabs the past few days of the buses, and one of the issues is that a lot of the buses that are consistently not running, while not in the city proper, but in the near in city, are not serviced by public bus lines at all, right? Rolling Knolls, the whole Admiral Oaks, that area, it's not serviced by a city bus line in a way that can get them to the school. And I just think this seems like a problem that we should be able to problem solve, right? The president of the EBA, the Eastport Business Association, shared an article. Mike Tomasini shared an article this morning about how a town in Colorado is using their city buses to work to solve the problem until the bus driver situation can be fixed. And I really think that this is something that we should be, as a city, able to do. Our buses are not heavily packed at any point in time, and our city buses are not. So I would really have loved for the Director of Transportation to be here tonight to have this conversation. But that's where we are with this. I would love to hear thoughts from others and ideas. Any ideas are welcome to problem solve this. Everybody has their own experiences with transportation in the city and the school system. So maybe you have something that you think might work, and I would love to hear that, because we need to come up with a solution.
Emily.
Hi, my name is Emily Tomasini. My husband, Mike, president of the EBA, shared that article today. But I'm here, number one, because I'm a parent at Eastport Elementary School, so I talk to Jess a lot. But number two, because the more that I go through this system, ACPS is such a big, big thing. And we in the city have a voice together. And I think that the transportation piece is something that we need more than a lot of other places. And the city needs to be the leader in working this out. Why we wait for the bigger system to get it, to get all the pieces in place. So anything that I can do as a citizen to help for the city to solve this problem for our cluster, I think that's what this commission, I would love to be involved in making sure that that's where my involvement should be in the smaller section of things. The city has a voice, and we have resources, and we have kids that need transportation. So why do we have to wait for AACPS? That's where I am. And I'm hoping to help with that.
Thanks. I think that's exactly true. We can't fix the whole school system's issues, but we as a commission, with our mission of getting resources for our students in the city and in this cluster, we can, come up with ideas to fix that. Because it's affecting our special ed kids from Eastport have not been able to get to Bates. The special ed, the PVA, the ECI kids are not able to get to Bates. That bus has been canceled for a week now, week and a half. And putting that burden on our families, it's a big burden. You have nurses who are missing shifts. You have, people of all stripes of employment who can't get to where they need to go because they have to take their kids to school, or the kids aren't getting to school. It's a problem. And I agree, Emily. I think this is something that we can we can work to fix.
One of the things I was thinking, I like your idea about the circulator. I don't know how the city, I know there's different stipulations for a driver, and I don't know what the drivers of the circulator, what their requirements are, other than to be able to have the CDR license and all that. But as far as the fingerprinting and the background check and all of that. So that's probably, an issue. But one of the things I was thinking about when you were talking about Eastport, there's so many churches over Eastport, and I'm just using that as an example. I know it's not the solution everywhere, but there may be somebody who drives, a smaller church bus that may take a couple of routes during the day. They may not want to work full time all day driving a bus, and most churches now require their bus drivers to have certain things. And maybe one of the things you can look into, just is to see maybe if it's if Eastport Elementary is missing this route every day, maybe there's a church over Eastport that has a smaller bus that could take care of that. That's just a suggestion.
Enid, I think that's a great idea. And I know at least 2 churches in Eastport that have buses, my church being one. Our buses, city buses, are funded in large part by the MTA. And what comes along with their funding are very strict restrictions or strict guidelines on how their buses can be used. That's why we are not able, at least at this point, to use regular city buses. The 2 buses that are being used are buses in the Recreation and Parks Department. Their buses are not funded by MTA, so we have flexibility with using those buses. And I'm sure if Dr. Duwa was here, he would explain the same thing. Right now, we don't have a transportation director. Dr. Duwa is filling in as acting.
Do you know where those 2 buses are, which neighborhoods those 2 buses are accommodating?
I do not.
Dr. Duwa has been the acting director for what, 5, 6 years now?
No, I think Director Gordon left less than 6 months ago.
Okay. So does that include the circulator? When you talk about the strict guidelines for the MTA?
Yes.
And what would be required to get that? Would that be through the governor's office to work on, emergency use applications for buses?
That might be an approach. It depends on how much of MTA's bus funding comes from the state and how much comes from the federal government. Our law department has investigated this, and that's how they came up with the ability to use Wrexham Park's buses. But I believe they are still working on it with the school systems Department of Transportation.
What about Hacker? Somebody told me that Hacker has at least vans. Housing Authority?
Yeah, they do.
No,
and I'm not sure why they're not being included in the discussions. They may very well be. But then, there's liability. There's all kinds of complications that are there.
Yeah, I understand.
Don't think that the law department and the city manager and others have not been having this discussion, because they have.
Right, I agree.
If I could jump in quickly, because to Ms. Finlayson's point, this has been what has kept a lot of people up at night for 3-4 months at this point. I think the bigger issue is, and I think in a way, just this is what you're getting at, what I've tried to communicate in the conversations, the meetings I have, is this is a crisis. And Therefore, the question is, what is necessary to maneuver through this and recognize that this is a crisis and we have to be able to find a way to use this. For example, from the get-go, the MVA shifted around their timing and their ability to take bus drivers through the licensing process because we knew we had to speed it up and it wasn't working. Sadly, we've hired and continue to hire a lot of new bus drivers, but other bus drivers quit. So we sort of keep coming back to the same level of bus drivers. With regard to church vans, this has been explored in several cases, and it comes down to liability. And the churches are not prepared to take on the liability that they would have to take on in some cases to do this. But I think, if I can just say, listening to this, it does seem to me that if there hasn't already, and again, with a focus on the city, an analysis of, where the needs are, right? What is it? Where is it that we need to cover? And then sort of move from there and figure out what might be available to plug those holes. And I think it's wonderful, smart thinking, just again, listening to this, to think that in terms of the fact that you as the city commission have the ability to really focus on the city. And that includes just sort of taking the whole of the city and figuring out exactly where the holes are. And then start plugging them as you find them, which could potentially be a number of different ways. I think many of you are probably aware that the draft regulations are up at this point on the law that was passed with regard to being able to use different vehicles for some school transportation. Unfortunately, it seems to still be pretty rigid, but testimony can be taken on that, because once we get those final regulations from the state, that could potentially free us up to use other kinds of transportation for students, which could help us tremendously, because if it could be the vans that the Department of Aging uses or some other group. So I would urge you at some point to take a look at the draft regulations that the MSDE has put up with regard to this transportation. Weigh in on it if you can, but also get a sense of what's coming there so we can think about that as part of the solution.
I have a question. What effect is this having on the students missing time out of school? I mean, is there something built into the system to address that, or what?
Unfortunately, there isn't. So I did ask for a report of what effect this is having on absentee and tardyism. The school system doesn't identify tardy by cause of tardy, so we can't tell how many kids are late to school every day because of the transportation issue, because the school system isn't tracking that. And the school system, they did give me the numbers for the transportation absenteeism, which are definitely higher than they were last year. But then there's also the matter of tracking that absenteeism, wherein that the student or family has to specifically identify to the school themselves that the reason that they're late is transportation. So if they're not saying that, then it's not necessarily getting tracked, right? So, but even with the numbers that we have, there's certainly a number of students who have been absent. It's unfortunate that I feel, my personal feeling is that all the work that we did learning how to have some sort of virtual connection to our classrooms last year isn't being utilized in this case, because it seems to me if we have these brand new sound systems in all of our classrooms that make it a lot easier than even it was last year for students to drop into their classroom, particularly at the high school level. And it's Annapolis High School that's really having the most effect. The most kids that are affected are at Annapolis High School, that they, even if they can't get to school because there's no bus and they have no other way of getting there, that they aren't able to at least virtually drop into the classroom, using the brand new sound systems that the school system just put in all of our classrooms. So they at least can hear what's going on, or there's not some way of more immediately, there is a virtual tutor program for quarantining students, but that's not for kids who are missing school because of transportation. So, I think these are all things that need to be discussed. I have not gotten very much response when I've asked the questions to the school system, other than Dr. Tobin has been great about responding, but to the school system itself about why we can and cannot be utilizing some of these other things when kids are stuck home because they don't have transportation. But I mean, that's a great question, Odessa. And, I think it's something when it was a couple of weeks, it was like, okay, but we're into the third week of the second marking period now. It's not okay for anyone. And I understand that it's a nationwide bus driver shortage, but there has to be a way to fix this for our students without just waiting for people to come back. Because how do we even know, to be honest, if the bus drivers are going to come back? Amazon pays great money, right? The other places pay great money. How do we even know that the bus drivers are going to come back? We have a software system. What is being done to use the routing software to look at the routes and see what can be done, even if it's just for the Annapolis cluster that's most affected. There are fees that are being assessed on the bus companies every day. Can that fee money be used if the school system's transportation department can't use the routing system software? Can it be used to hire Prismatic, which is doing all of this work using our routing system to create, using routing software to create maps for next year and routes for next year's school start time changes? Can we use them, and ask them? What would it cost to have them look at rerouting our software? These are all questions, but there's just hasn't been an answer to, and it's a frustrating situation.
I think I heard you say, Jess, that the kids that may miss the bus, they can tune in virtually.
They cannot. That's a problem, right?
Oh,
You can't tune in, which is unfortunate considering we just had an entire year getting used to being able to do that. If you're in a college class and you can't make it in for whatever, you can generally drop in virtually now. That's even pre-COVID. But now we just over the last few months installed brand new audio software in all of our classrooms that make it that much easier to drop into the classroom, or at least listen to the lecture that's happening, or I don't know.
Yeah, Jess, kids need to be in person, in school. And if we can solve that as a city and get in front of it, that's where I want to live, in Annapolis, in a place that, and I guess my question for Ms. Finlayson or anybody else at the city, is there an interest at the city level of helping solve this problem?
Are you talking about still the transportation?
Yeah.
Yeah, as I said, our law department has met, I'm sure, with the Board of Ed's law department, as well as our transportation departments, trying to figure out how to get around the MTA requirement that our buses only be used for public transportation. And maybe my terminology is not correct, but we are restricted on how we can use our city buses, because most of our buses are funded in part and in large part by the Maryland State Transit Association. So we have to follow their guidelines. The city manager indicated to me some time ago that they were in discussions trying to figure out how they could get around those restrictions. The buses that we can use are those that are owned by the Recreation and Parks Department, because those buses are not funded by MTA. So we are working on it still. And I've sent, since I've been sitting here, I sent the city manager a text to ask him if there's an update, and he hasn't responded. So.
Well, great. I mean, I think that's the support that I think that would be needed on the city level. And then it sounds like maybe on the state level too, but that's what I'm hoping for.
Speaking of students being tardy and not attending, I still go to the high school every Friday morning at 6:45 a.m. to greet the students. And I always have an opportunity to speak with the principal as he comes out to greet the students also. And I asked about tardiness because I stay there probably for an hour. And I see the long line of cars coming in well after the 7:30 timeframe. And he indicated, and I asked, how do you handle this? I mean, you know, and they have severely laxed their requirements for tardiness. They are not counting the 9 tardies, a 9-week period or whatever. They're not using those restrictions, at least at this point in time. Actually, I believe the first hour of the day, or maybe the first 30 minutes of the day, is not instructional time. It's, I don't know how else to describe it, but it's something else other than instructional time. So the kids that are getting there late are not missing actual instruction at 7:30 in the morning. So the school system, at least at Annapolis High School, and I have to believe that all the schools are given the autonomy to do what they need to do for their student population. So they are making changes to meet the needs and to help to address the problem. Not solve it, but to address it.
Laura.
As I'm sitting here, as I was listening to you, Ms. Finlayson, I was thinking, okay, I understand if the MTA pays for, gas and the drivers for our routes, would it be possible to have the county subcontract the city to run some of those routes so that we weren't using MTA funds to pay for those routes?
The MTA funds pays for the actual buses.
Right.
We pay for the drivers and the liability.
So we
cannot actually use the physical buses.
Even if they were, even if that cost, whatever there was a wear and use amount that was reimbursed to the MTA for the use of those buses?
That possibly could be worked out. We're talking millions of dollars.
But I mean, if we're paying, the school system is not only not paying for routes that aren't running, but they're also apparently collecting some amount of penalties from bus driving companies that aren't running. So the school system has some money to spend. So if there was a way around that, and maybe it is something that we would need to pursue at the state level, some way of some kind of a waiver from the state that would allow MTA funded buses to be subcontracted out at certain periods to run school bus runs or something like that. But that would be a way to maybe plug up the gaps, at least temporarily.
Well, I think that's a great idea. And Joanna, from your perspective and from mine, maybe we pass that on to our respective departments to look into the,
and a good question for our representatives, so we'll send that on to.
I was going to say, I mean, what was evident at the beginning, starting this, is that everybody, our state delegation to everyone, wants to do whatever needs to be done. And so it's a matter of sort of getting heads together and figuring out what we need. And so I think, this is not something I hadn't fully understood, the city bus MTA issue. And it may be that Laura's suggestion is something I will certainly pass it on and see if there's a way we can work with our state partners and inquire and see if that's an option, because we need options right now.
Well, you're definitely correct, and there must be some savings somewhere that could be reallocated. Absolutely.
I can't believe that we can't spend money if we're really trying. I mean, I just, find that hard to believe.
It's past 8 o'clock. Anything else on transportation before we move to the rest of the agenda? Okay, any other updates from committees? We have no unfinished business, so moving to new business. We have vaccination clinics on the agenda. Laura, do you want to kick off the discussion?
Yes. As you know, the school system has run one round of vaccination clinics aimed specifically at the 5 to 11-year-olds who are now eligible for COVID vaccines. It involved an online sign up. It was very tense. You had to be on the computer exactly at 7 o'clock. All the slots were gone by 7:15. The screens timed out a couple of times while you were trying to go through the process. So you had to be able to know that you needed to refresh the screen to get yourself through. And as far as I was aware, and again, I was very stressed about doing it, so I wasn't, maybe didn't take in all the details, but I did not see any way that the instructions were provided in Spanish. Everything was in English. So there was a certain degree of proficiency that was required to get one of those appointments. And even as I was going through this process for my daughter, was thinking how many families would not have been able to do that. Either don't have a computer with a big enough screen to fill out all the copious health department fields that you had to. And one screen asked me to upload a copy of my insurance card. So, I mean, if you were a non-English speaking family, or one that, a parent who was trying to maybe do this on your cell phone or something like that, it probably wouldn't have been possible for you to get an appointment. So, was talking with another friend of mine who's on the governor's task force for vaccine equity. And she we're setting up teams to go out into communities, specifically to target communities where people can't go through a lengthy online process to get an appointment through a pharmacy or a school system or whoever. And so we have, she was asking me to identify areas in Annapolis where we might be able to run clinics. These clinics would be walk-in, no registration required. They can do pediatric and adult at the same spot. So if a parent comes to bring their kids in and they're due for their booster, or they bring their high school student who's now old enough, who's now been long enough that they need their booster, one-stop shopping. And so the first place that we approached was Eastport United Methodist Church, because they have a nice big parking lot, and they were close to the Eastport community, which we through Jess and I had been discussing, had a large Hispanic community that hadn't been able to take advantage of the online registration process. So our first clinic is going to run this Sunday from 12 to 4. It is walk-in, so anybody can come and walk in. It's first come, first served. If we run out of vaccines, we are doing a second one in 3 weeks, so that everyone who gets a first shot will be able to follow with a second shot. But if there's demand, they can increase the number of doses that they give us for the next clinic. So if we have to turn people away and say, sorry, we ran out, we can get more for the next one. So we can do first and second doses at the next clinic. And this task force runs through April, so we can continue to schedule further out. We have been talking to Asbury Methodist on West Street to try to bring to do a clinic in that neighborhood. And then we've been looking at one more place. I have tried repeatedly to get Anne Arundel County Public Schools to let us host one at the middle school, and have not gotten anywhere with that. So my next target is going to be to try to find if there's a church along that area. Perhaps Heritage Baptist came to mind. Someplace in there, if anyone has a church that has a big parking lot and a large community room that would be interested in hosting, let us know. But I figure as many of these as we can bring to our community, the more kids that we get vaccinated, the more people we get vaccinated, the healthier we'll all be. Maybe we can control the rate in our community a bit, but especially for our students, because we have so many exposures at school and so many kids quarantining, and we've already got kids who can't come to school because of transportation, having kids missing time because somebody in their class got COVID and they've all been exposed, and now they all have to quarantine. We can't afford kids to miss any more days of school. So that's part of the motivation for setting this up. Anybody who would like to volunteer, let me know. We could use some volunteers to help on the day of. And if you have a location for future clinics, also let me know. Thank you.
I was going to just add on to that. Also, we're looking at the areas like Eastport United Methodist where people who have less transportation ability,
Yes.
so that they can walk to. Not only those, because the clinics that were offered by the school system were at Tyler Heights and Germantown. So, there's a large swath of Annapolis that wasn't able to walk or easily get to those clinics.
I think in the
if they
next
were
round,
able to.
I think they're doing Mills Parole was one of them. So they are going to hit that community. But still, there's an awful lot of kids whose families don't have transportation to get them to an evening appointment across town. So trying to find locations like the West Street Asbury Methodist was because it's close to Clay Street. So families that can't, that don't have transportation can walk to that. So other locations that fit those criteria would be great.
Excellent work. Thank you so much, Laura, and others for helping set this up. This is a huge step that helps our students. I would have to add, in speaking with Annapolis High School staff, it's also a huge step that helps our staff, because like the athletic director has to personally walk kids through the process of getting the testing so they're eligible to play each week, the weekly testing required if they do not have their vaccinations or they don't discuss their vaccination. So the burden it's putting on our staff members to have kids unvaccinated is a huge one we don't often see behind the scenes. Thanks.
Any other new business?
I wanted to just bring up quickly, Emily who spoke earlier on transportation. We have been discussing, and it's been a topic that's come up over the years with the Education Commission, but the lack of activities for middle schoolers in particular after school, the lack of after school activities as a whole in this cluster. Most of the other clusters have community organizations that offer after school activities and after school sports for everyone from toddlers all the way up through high school. The Annapolis cluster is very lacking in that, unless you're on a travel team, which of course requires a lot of resources and skills. And
just, I would say not even a travel team, just to play in county sport leagues.
Right.
I'm going to Brooklyn Park on Saturday for a game. Right. It's just not accessible.
It's not accessible. So Emily and another mom at Eastport, Neely Garrity, have offered to sort of look into this and discuss I will say, very exciting news that just came out this week is that we are having intramurals twice a week at Annapolis Middle School, which I'm really excited about. They just started activity buses at Annapolis Middle, which is great, and that's 2 days a week. But as a whole, we need something more. And so Emily and Neely, Emily, if you want to talk a little bit about it, and then I was going to ask if we could maybe have because I think obviously there's a big connection between what happens outside of the classroom as well as what happens within the classrooms when it comes to education. And so maybe if we had a committee that looked into after school activities, particularly for our middle schools, but as a whole for our communities.
yeah, I don't have a lot to say, but I think that, again, my theme is the city has resources that we can take advantage of that we might not be taking advantage of in coordination with the schools and the city. Kids want after school activities. We have a really successful program in Eastport, which is just based on parent volunteers. And not every school in the city has that built up right now. And I think that Neely and I are in a place where we could try and push that at other schools in the city, and try and also to get resources that are available to kids that live in the city tied in with the schools. I think we really could benefit from that.
I agree that that's a huge unmet need in our cluster. And it could also kind of instill some more school pride, school spirit at the middle school levels for kids who are not engaged in much as in school. So having those activities is really needed to keep kids.
Especially now. And there is money available for these kinds of activities now. So
we have to request and demand them.
Exactly. So India, I don't know to set up a subcommittee. Do we have to do something? Okay, so we'll have a recreation subcommittee and invite Emily and Neely and anyone else to be on it. Neely couldn't be here tonight, but and I think was Daisha interested in being on it as well?
Mm-hmm.
Emily. Daisha, who is a huge community connector at Eastport and throughout Eastport and the community. So if anyone on the commission is interested in being on this, please let me know. Otherwise, that's all I have for new business.
Thanks. Jess, any final thoughts or announcements?
I would just remind people that the Coffee with the Principal is happening this Friday morning at 7:45. And we can post the link on if you're not already a member of the AHS PTSA Facebook page, I'll be putting up a reminder there. And we can post a link on the Annapolis Education Commission Facebook page or circulate it by email to anyone who's interested in the Google Meet link. It's still being done virtually, 7:45 to 8:45 this Friday. And you can ask Mr. Joannis some of these pressing questions you might have.
Oh, Annapolis Middle School has Coffee with the Principal next Friday. And I can circulate that link. And then I also wanted to just let everybody know that on Friday nights and Saturday nights from 5 until 9, Annapolis Middle and Bates Middle have come together to work together to run as a fundraising effort a hot cocoa shack at Quiet Waters Park for the ice rink. So we're giving the kids fun things to eat and drink while they're out there. If you have not been to the ice rink, or if you have children who have not been there, it's a fantastic, wholesome, fun night. Annapolis Middle School kids have been going on Friday nights for a few years, and it's fantastic. And we're really excited to be, we did this a couple years before COVID, Annapolis Middle School did, and we're really excited to be working with Bates on this. I like the idea of having some connection between our two middle schools and fundraising. So come by, buy some hot chocolate, buy some hot cup o noodles soup, or some chips and cookies and things. And we are always in need of volunteers. So if you have the shifts are 2 hours, if you have a couple hours on a Friday or Saturday night, please let us know, because we could certainly use volunteers. It's also a great service hour volunteer. So if you have kids, middle school or high school or wherever, that need service hours, those 2 hour shifts are fantastic ways to earn them.
Speaking of service hours, high school students who need service hours can also come and volunteer at the vaccine clinics. I have a sign up we have a sign up form for that, and we will sort of sign off on their service sheets as well.
Can I ask the areas that we don't have representatives on the commission? I mean, like Jeff said that he's leaving. What district is that? What area is that, Jeff? I mean, Ward 2 and I see. Who else we don't have representatives for? What other wards?
Ward 6 hasn't been here and
Corey's here. Corey is our incoming Ward 6 representative. She just had to wait. There's been a delay because the committee that meets with the city hasn't to look at the applications for this commission hasn't met for 3 months or 2 months. But Corey Mackel is going to be the Ward 6.
Oh, okay,
Ward
that's
6.
great.
Yay.
Yay.
Yeah. uh-huh.
Thank you.
And what's the other wards?
One.
Ward
Ward,
five.
Ward
Who's from-
1 and Ward
who's-
2.
who's
We
from
have
Ward
someone
5?
interested, I think, from Ward 2.
Ward 2, Ward 6. Oh, no,
Ward
Corey.
5, we don't have anyone, do we?
Okay.
Oh,
Where is
yeah,
Ward,
I'm sorry.
where is Ward 5?
I
Where is
forget
that?
that you're Ward 5 because you're the chair.
Ward 4 is Kayla, but we haven't seen her for a couple of, I don't know if she still participates.
What area is that? I mean, I'm trying to find out what part of Annapolis is Ward 4?
Kayla lives in Kingsport.
Kingsport?
Pardon me?
You say Kingsport? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Bywater, Newtown, Spa Road. It's all Ward 4.
Oh, okay.
So it's 1, 2, and 4, or not, I don't know about 4, but it's 1 and 2 for sure, Lily. Odessa.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Try to recruit. I hate to see Jeff go. My gosh, Jeff. I hate to see you go. All right. But I'll be working with you with the, I plan to talk to some people in the community about the charter.
Yeah, Odessa, I just sent to everybody an email providing a hyperlink to Bloomberg and a promise for a Zoom meeting for the subcommittee members before Christmas sometime. So we'll gather again. We'll try to get a better idea as to what's required on Bloomberg's part for an application. But the big key, I think, is going to be getting a group of potential board of directors members. So please, everybody, come with a list of 3 people who you think are willing to dig in, get their hands dirty, and move forward.
And a while back, I had talked to the man that's the principal, I think, up at KIPP in Baltimore. That's been about 2 or 3 years ago. But I can check into that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, KIPP is one of many, worthy charter management organizations that are out there to choose from.
Okay.
I think that makes most sense rather than trying to start something from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Actually, we did a tour of the KIPP school in Baltimore. I think it's expanded now into high school. They started with elementary and we're about to add a middle school, and I think they're now up to high school.
Oh, wow. That's good.
Mhm.
Well, if I could just weigh in, putting a different hat on, which is the charter school work evaluation work I've done over the years. You have to, so successful groups start with a very solid board. But you also have to determine the pedagogy that you're looking for. KIPP has a very specific kind of pedagogy and structure, which may be what you want, or it may not. And so, I think the group has to, once organized, think through, what you think will best suit this community. And that's a long conversation for you all to have, but it's just something I would say is part of the work you have to do. So.
Thank you, everyone, for another great meeting. Our next meeting is January 26th. Enjoy the rest of 2021. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.